Welcome to the startup presentation portion of today. My name is Marcus Dolph. I'm a program director at the MIT Startup Exchange. MIT Startup Exchange is part of MIT Corporate Relations, and together with the Industrial Relation program, we form the core offering of the corporate membership program. While on one hand, the ILP is the front door for corporations to interface with the university, to interface with the institute, MIT Startup Exchange is the interface for corporates to work with MIT startups. Before we go to the startup presentations, I'm going to take a few minutes and cover what we do, and then also spend a little time on themes and trends regarding sensing. So each year we connect 1,900 MIT connected startups with our corporate members. We make over 600 high quality, highly vetted introductions between our MIT startups and the corporate members. By MIT connected startups, I mean those where at least one founder has a connection to MIT, meaning they might be an alum, maybe a faculty, a researcher, or the technology from the company, from the startup, might be a license from MIT. The corporate members are probably, many of you are listening to this, but just in case, these are Global 1,000 companies from across the world, from across many different industries. A little bit more about the 1,900 number. The technologies these companies employ come from across all of MIT, from all departments. And they're solving many different use cases and many different problems across many different industries. In addition, the 1,900 number is one that's constantly growing. Each year, we're adding between 100 and 200 startups. And in addition, what's very interesting about that 1,900 number and the MIT startups is that they're predominantly B2B. And predominantly, they have an MVP, meaning a product that could be tested by a corporate. And they're also, I would say, deep tech, hard technology. So the quality of the technology team is really, really strong. Here are some recent public partnerships between MIT startups and some of our corporate members. These take many forms. Sometimes it's a license agreement. And sometimes it's some kind of customer direct investment. We don't try to define that. We leave that up to the two sides to decide. Quickly, a few words about how to engage and how to take advantage of this program. So number one is do what you're doing today. Come to one of these events. In a typical non-COVID year, we'll be present across the globe. We do approximately 20 events that are in person. We bring the top startups with us to all these events. So it's an excellent way to not only see the latest trends, but also engage and begin to explore partnership. In fact, during these times, we've actually accelerated our event offering via webinars. And so we're on a weekly basis, we're hosting webinars with faculty presentations and startup presentations. Through your ILP account manager or program director, our corporate members can choose to engage with specific startups that are fitting their specific needs. We also offer an open innovation platform where corporates will post specific defined business problems they're facing along with use cases. This begins a selection process. Startups will apply to this, a very effective way of casting a wide net to find potential solutions to corporate business problems. All right, so that was the quick overview of Startup Exchange. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about themes and trends as it relates to sensing technology. And this is an exercise that is based entirely on input from the 5 startups that you will be seeing shortly. And it's not meant to be an exhaustive analysis and exhaustive exercise, but I think it will provide you some validation of early signals, perhaps a little bit of an indication of that silver lining that you heard people talk about in the previous panel. Now, with that said, let's start at the macro level. A number of public health risks. We've seen this over the last year. For example, the California wildfires, where you can't go outside because the quality of the air is so bad. COVID-19 has obviously had a tremendous impact, but this is driving a need for better sensing technology. And in these cases, I would say better air quality sensing technology. There's also a virtualization of work and recreation trend that we're seeing. This is the life we're currently living. We're working from home. Our recreation is from home. There's increasing use of home gyms. So it's changing our lives essentially at a fundamental level. Now, this is leading to certain product requirements. We need technology that can go where we are. So we need sensing technology that is low power, low weight, small size, and this will manifest in form factors that are largely handheld or integrated into existing products. For example, clothing, obviously wearables. And with that, we need technology that is also creating new experiences for us. So not only go where we are, but offer new level of services, new value. I would say the keywords here are predictive, real-time, non-contact, non-invasive, and remote monitoring. Now, let's talk a little bit about use cases. So these new sensors, for example, electronic noses or chips, and the improved sensitivity that they're providing are enabling new use cases. On a residential level, we can talk about home air quality sensing. We can talk about refrigerator food quality sensing, or trash receptacles. When is it time to empty the trash or buy new food, let's say? From a commercial real estate angle, you can look at hotel air room quality. Is there mold present? Is there cigarette smoke? Is there COVID-19 in the air? You can envision new use cases such as building entrance permission, meaning you're going to go to the building and through a non-invasive, non-contact way, you're going to obtain access to the building or not. This could be something on different transportation hubs, such as airports. And finally, you can also track occupancy levels based on CO2 in the building. Again, this is probably quite interesting during pandemic times, so you're not have too much density in terms of building occupancy. So that concludes the trends and themes. Hopefully that was somewhat interesting. At the very least, I think this is going to tee up the startup presentations. We have 5 startups today. They're each going to talk for 4 or 5 minutes approximately, and then we'll follow with Q&A, a couple of minutes of Q&A. So please ask your questions via the Q&A, and we'll go to our first startup.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Trudgrove, and I'm a program manager at Empatica. And I'm excited to tell you today about some of the work we've been doing over the past few months to build out an early detection algorithm for the coronavirus a few days before symptoms present. So to give you a quick background on Empatica, we're an MIT spinoff whose focus is in creating digital biomarkers and endpoints that can be used for clinical trials, for research studies, and also for healthcare. So how do we do this? We've actually had to build out our own hardware. So you can see 2 of the devices that are currently on the market, and then we have the Embrace Plus coming out later this year. And we've had to do this because we use the unique combination of sensors to build out the machine learning algorithms that we use. So the way that our devices work is we continuously monitor this physiological data. All of it's ported to a user-facing app on an iPhone or Android. And all of that's then ported up to a cloud platform where physicians, pharma companies, researchers can review all of this data in real time. So this is just to give you some insight into some of the biomarkers that we collect, everything from heart rate to skin temperature. But we also build out these algorithms that can detect objectively metrics around activity, sleep, and then because of our electrodermal activity sensor, we can also detect measures around autonomic arousal or stress. So at the beginning of this year, when the COVID pandemic hit, we really saw two problems. We had researchers, pharma companies, and clinicians all reaching out to us asking if we had some way to remotely monitor patients at home. And so what we did is, since we had this research platform, is we iterated on it with our other wearable device as well to create a platform where a patient can see all of their data in real time as it's streaming from their wrist, but a clinician can also see all of this data up in a cloud platform so that you can really monitor vitals at home. The other big issue that I think all of us are very aware of is the lack of testing at the beginning of the pandemic. And so not only was there this lack of testing, but there was such a high rate of asymptomatic individuals who didn't even know that they should be getting tested. And so what we've been doing at Empatica is building out an algorithm that can detect the coronavirus a few days before you are even aware that you might be sick. So giving you a daily risk indicator. And how have we been able to do this? Actually, back in the beginning of 2018, the US government's Health and Human Services reached out to us and asked us if we would be able to help build a wearable platform that could give an indication of when you might be sick with a respiratory infection, at the earliest indication as possible. And so we were partnered with Duke University and Columbia on 3 different clinical studies. 2 of them were challenge studies in which we were able to actually monitor individuals who are healthy, who are then inoculated with the flu or the cold, and then see what the actual wearable data looked like as their viral load increased. We saw this with PCR, and then we also had the symptom reporting. And we were actually able to build an algorithm that could detect a few days before a patient was even reporting symptoms that their viral load was increasing. And so this year we've expanded that partnership with HHS, and we're currently running a validation study on healthcare workers who are at risk of contracting the coronavirus, who are in high risk wards. And so the goal of this validation study is to show that this Aura algorithm can also work specifically with the coronavirus. And with this data, we're going to be submitting to the FDA an emergency use authorization so that we can get this out to the public. So how do we hope to help? We're really looking to not replace testing, but we want to give individuals this early risk indicator so that they'll know that they can self-quarantine, preventing them from infecting anybody else and maybe getting early care for themselves, but also knowing that they should go out and get a coronavirus test. The other thing that we're hoping to do with our platform is give this sort of remote monitoring, vital sign monitoring at home so that we can reduce patient burden on the high number of hospital beds that were used up at the beginning of the pandemic. We're really hoping to help as well with this back to work and back to school strategy. So if you're a pharma company looking to monitor patients at home, or even just a company or educational institution looking to really bolster your back to work strategy, please feel free to reach out at ct@empatica.com. Thank you.
Great, Chelsea. Thank you so much. I'm Ariadna Rodenstein from the MIT Startup Exchange, and between Marcus and myself, we'll be moderating the Q&A for the 5 startups that we have with us today. So Chelsea, that was a great presentation. Thank you. One of the questions that has come up, if you could explain a little more your technology and how you are different from other things that we're seeing trying to develop today for COVID or beyond.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the audio cut out a little bit, but I think you asked how are we different than other wearable devices, and something that we're really focused on is as a medical device company. So all of our devices are CE marked or FDA cleared. And so we're really focused on creating digital endpoints that are backed up by some gold standard or ground truth in the field. So for something like our sleep algorithm, which monitors different metrics around sleep, we're actually comparing all of that data to polysomnography, which is the gold standard in the field. So really being grounded in the sort of clinical validation is very important to us, and also outputting data that clinicians or researchers can see all of the raw data so that they know where the actual data and the algorithms are coming from.
Hi, Chelsea. How have you answered the question of desirability amongst the pop that already wears a smartwatch? And are they open to wear another device such as this?
Yeah, also a really good question. So our device that we use for clinical trials is very small and lightweight. It's actually much smaller than the Apple Watch, and it has around a 48-hour battery life. So we've really tried to design it to be as minimal as possible. So it doesn't really intrude in your life. It's waterproof. So we actually have a lot of people in our company that wear 2 watches, and we haven't seen any problem with compliance or adherence in clinical trials. So really just trying to make like a medical device that people want to wear in our daily life is a huge focus of Empatica's. And with the Embrace Plus that's coming out, we've also designed a very small device that will actually have an on-wrist charger. So you'll never need to actually take it off. You'll be able to charge it directly on your wrist.
Thank you. And where would you say you are in scale-up prep?
So we're actually fully on the market.
Right. And can you talk a little more about scale-up prep?
Sure. So we're actually fully on the market. So our first sort of what we were best known for is our FDA clearance for the seizure detection algorithm that we built. So it was our sort of first device on the market. So having to go through the clinical validation of that. So we are on the market with this coronavirus work that we're doing and the Aura algorithm. We are in this sort of validation stage with Health and Human Services and working with the FDA to have it approved. So I'm hoping to be on the market really by the end of this year.
Thank you. And can one participate in Empatica device testing or purchase the Embrace 2?
Yeah, so the Embrace 2 is on the market right now with the seizure detection algorithm for people with epilepsy. The Embrace Plus will be available for the sort of vital sign monitoring. And right now, really the main use case is for pharmaceutical companies with our Embrace 2 device who might want to use it for a monitoring study, or for academic researchers. We also have the E4. And the Embrace Plus will be both a consumer device for monitoring vitals and also used in this sort of clinical research studies as well.
Thank you. And what would you say the most popular question would be if one were to ask you something?
Recently, the major question that we've been getting is about Embrace Plus. People are really excited, especially in the research space, about it coming out. So it's going to be coming out at the end of this year, early Q1. And some of the exciting features about it, we've been really iterating on the sensors internally at Empatica. We build everything in-house. So we'll have an improved PPG sensor. We'll be able to monitor SpO2 directly from the wrist. It has this on-wrist charger, and it will have a new sort of e-ink display that we'll be able to customize for different research studies as well.
That's great. And actually, we just got another question from the audience. So why a watch form factor? Can't this be translated to other types of wearables?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we've thought about incorporating other wearables into our sensor suite. And so right now, the Embrace 2 and the E4 are both a device that is solely on the wrist. We get a lot of interesting data from the electrodermal activity sensor at the wrist, but the Embrace Plus will actually be in a pod form. So it could technically be strapped to other parts of your body if you want to collect data from other areas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, SENSE.nano, for the invitation. Good afternoon. I'm Mary from C2 Sense, and today I'm going to be introducing our Halo diagnostic technology. Now, our healthcare system is currently collapsing under the burden of preventable medical visits. COVID-19 has exposed how hospitals and clinics have struggled to provide adequate care to support the US population. Now, the choke point in healthcare is the outdated model of requiring in-hospital visits and triage. Now, telehealth could solve this challenge by enabling clinicians to do symptomatic triage of patients at home, but what's missing are high-quality diagnostics to inform their clinical decisions and enable them to write digital prescriptions for care. And what we need is a way to triage patients at home using simple, fast, and accurate diagnostics connected digitally to a telehealth experience. Now that's where Halo comes in. Halo is a diagnostic technology that transforms any smartphone into a fluorescent immunoassay reader. Our proprietary combination of luminescence chemistry, optical decoding software, and artificial intelligence enable lab quality diagnostic testing at home. Now, the breakthrough in this method is the transformation of the smartphone into a chemical reader capable of recognizing luminescent tags in the diagnostic test strips. Now, these test results are invisible to the naked eye and require the smartphone for interpretation, which means the telehealth providers can decide what information to share with the patient and how to manage the patient's next steps in a controlled manner, similar to how traditional healthcare would work. Halo enables simpler formats for at-home diagnostics and straightforward aggregation of data for outbreak management. Now, to better articulate the value of this technology, I'd like to share a recent customer story. The NIH initiated their Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics, that's RADX, program to speed innovation in commercializing COVID-19 testing. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this program. Now, to be considered a clinically viable COVID-19 antigen test, 10 picograms per milliliter is the limit of detection required by RADX. Now, 3 months ago, a late-stage RADX grant recipient contacted us because their test performance was stuck at 50 picograms per milliliter. So that's 5 times higher than that target of 10 picograms per mil. Now, in 2 weeks, Halo successfully read all test assays at less than 1 picogram per milliliter. Now, that's a 50 times improvement in sensitivity and a remarkable breakthrough in limit of detection for a rapid antigen test. Now, from a practical perspective, this improved performance means our sample collection can be less invasive, collecting saliva instead of an invasive nasal swab. And we may be able to detect the disease over a longer period of time. So by providing more accurate, less invasive diagnostics that work over longer periods of infection, we can bring the battle against COVID from the clinics into the home. And moreover, we can share these results with telehealth providers and disease surveillance at HHS. So currently, we're bringing an at-home COVID-19 antigen, antibody, and combination antigen flu test through the FDA's emergency use authorization process with the intent of having the antigen test ready for mass deployment in January and the other tests shortly thereafter. Now, if your organization has an existing digital experience with a large customer group, be it at-home telehealth, school districts, universities, airlines, cruises, sports teams, we should talk. Halo can bring transparency to your population health, a better and cheaper experience for individual healthcare, and a brand experience that you control. Now, the time has never been better to make this transition to at-home diagnosis and remote patient care. So please contact us to learn more about Halo, especially if I don't get to a question. My email's right up here. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Mary. We're going to take a few questions here. And so please make sure you submit them via the tool. The first one I have is regarding your manufacturing of the diagnostic test strips. Is this something you're looking to do in-house, or what are the plans there?
That's a great question. So we're actually working with key partners to manufacture the test strips. So there is C2 Sense, IP associated with making the test strips themselves, and we have key early partners who'll be manufacturing in bulk. So we're looking in the millions by January, about 5 million plus.
Got it. What about FDA regulation? Are you approved? Where are you in that process?
Yeah, we're currently working our way through the emergency use authorization process. So we're early in the process, but we are on track for FDA approval. That's something we're pushing forward as quickly as possible.
Let's talk about some other applications of your technology platform. What are other use cases or applications outside of diagnostics? And maybe talk a little bit about results you might have seen.
Sure, yeah. So the really cool part of this technology, the big breakthrough is getting the smartphone to recognize a chemical signature. It's really a totally new way for the smartphone to interact with the world around it. So consequently, diagnostics was certainly a part of our roadmap, since it was a way to read a diagnostic tool using a smartphone. We hadn't initially anticipated on releasing that for the next few years because it was going to be further down the line. But with COVID, we've accelerated that development extremely rapidly. Now, in parallel, some other applications where we've seen the most traction is in anti-counterfeiting. So you can put an invisible mark onto a product. Thinking about high-end luxury goods certainly are something you think of being counterfeited frequently, but pharmaceuticals are massively counterfeited, responsible for tens of thousands of deaths a year. So we're going into those spaces, pharma and luxe brands in particular. And by adding these invisible marks to the product and then using a phone to authenticate, you not only give the sort of product authentication power directly to your consumer, but you also then protect your brand in both its quality and its safety in the case of pharmaceuticals.
It's quite fascinating. What about water quality? Is that something you've looked at? Can you use your technology to assess water quality?
That's an interesting one. I would assume that in order to assess water quality, if you had something similar to like a lateral flow assay, where you had some sort of chemical reaction, throughout a test strip that indicated the presence or absence of certain contaminants, and you wanted that to be readable using this Halo or related technology, it certainly could be done. We haven't looked in depth at that application, but that is a very interesting one to look into more.
Understood. So I think we're going to pause here and go to the next startup presentation. Thank you very much, Mary.
Thanks, everyone.
I am Mohan Thanikachalam. I'm the CEO of Dynocardia. I'm also a cardiac surgeon. Over the last 6 years, I've led a joint MIT and Tufts medical school team that's come up with a fundamentally new method and technology to measure blood pressure accurately and continuously. Why do we need more accurate and continuous blood pressure measurements? There are close to 1.4 billion people with hypertension or high blood pressure across the globe. It's the #1 cause for stroke and heart attacks. And every single patient in the hospital needs accurate and continuous blood pressure measurements. So we know blood pressure changes almost minute by minute. For the last 100 years, we've been using the cuff-based technologies that provide only single-time measurements. Particularly these automatic cuffs we have been using also associate multiple inaccuracies. Because of that, it leads to monitoring gaps. For example, in hospitals, we're wrongly diagnosing 30% of people with high blood pressure. And nighttime blood pressure is the #1 cause for mortality. I have no technology to measure or address it. The only way to get accurate and continuous measurement now is through invasive arterial lines, which can be done only in critical care settings in hospitals. So because of this, there have been multiple attempts at more accurate and continuous measurement. The reason we don't have such a technology is not because of lack of technology, it's the methodology by which we measure blood pressure. So because of that, the National Institute of Health called for fundamentally new approaches to blood pressure, and we were one of the teams to select it, to work on it. To understand the technology, when you feel the pulse at your wrist, what you feel is the force transmitted from the pressure wave inside the blood vessel. First, we built a unique optomechanical sensor, which is 100 times sensitive than a fingertip, converts the spatial temporal force information on your skin into video images. When we reconstruct these images, essentially we reconstruct the pressure wave inside the blood vessel. And based on a proprietary methodology, we can directly measure systolic and diastolic blood pressure continuously. In addition, the technology can measure heart rate, respiratory rate, and other cardiohemodynamic parameters. And the technology has applications across the healthcare spectrum in hospital, chronic disease management, such as telemedicine, as a wearable wellness device, in clinical trials, and many other applications. But based on our market assessment, speaking to physician groups across the country, as well as some of the large companies, our initial focus is going to be in the critical care market in the hospitals for various reasons, including some of them listed here in the slide. Particularly in COVID-19, there is a need for a solution like ours where a patient can be monitored continuously at home and able to predict people who need intervention, bring them early to the hospital, able to monitor them through the hospital care and discharge them early, such way, optimizing hospital resources as well as protecting healthcare personnel. And currently, in the process of implementing studies to assess that. So what are we looking for? We're looking for partnership with companies across the healthcare sector, medical devices, pharmaceutical, the insurance company, home monitoring, and as well as companies in the wearable wellness market. And what we're looking for is joint product development in some of these markets, as well as licensing and distribution agreements. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mohan. That was great. So we'll jump into the Q&A. Why would you say we need a fundamentally new solution for blood pressure monitoring?
Yeah, as I mentioned, right, for the last 100 years, we've been using this cuff-based technologies, and it provides only this single-time measurements, a lot of inaccuracies. So in hospitals, right, because of these issues, we have, even till this day, we're putting invasive arterial lines to get continuous. So we need a more non-invasive, reliable, continuous solution. If you move outside the hospital, your average blood pressure throughout the day, your nighttime blood pressure, how much blood pressure changes, a much better predictor of your risk for stroke and heart attacks than the single-time measurements. And having looked at blood pressure over the last 100 years, we have no idea what your true blood pressure is. And this data is required for fundamentally new ways of disease prevention. For all these reasons, NIH considers that number one priority. And as I said, it's a 100-year-old problem.
Next question. Can you let us know the status of the product a little bit? What's going on with commercialization, with trials, with FDA approval?
Right.
Where are you at?
So we currently initiated multi-center clinical trials. As I said, our initial focus is in the hospital market. So we are implementing trials across the country where we are comparing a device against intra-arterial line across patient populations, wide range of blood pressure, various clinical scenarios. At the same time, we're also initiating trials in COVID-19 patients. So our expectation is, we will finish the clinical trials over the next 1 year. And after that, in parallel, we are also in discussion with some of the large companies in the space where, of course, in the process of licensing and distribution agreements.
Great. One other question. How does the device actually work? And does the sensor placement affect things as well?
How does the device actually work? As I said, so it's a tactile sensor. So the device goes on a large arteries, like the radial artery at the wrist, and it captures the spatial temporal information. And then it continuously measures blood pressure. And then here, I think your question was placement. So it's a camera-based sensor. So you don't have to have a very precise placement. Once you place the device on the wrist, it can figure out where the pulsation is. It automatically locks on the pulsation. So there's also a user benefit there.
Well, hi, everyone. My name is George Sun. I'm the founder and CEO of Nextiles. To understand the significance of what we do at Nextiles is to look at today's industry standards when it comes to wearable devices. And that is, today we attempt to combine a variety of off-the-shelf technologies and repurpose them into a smaller form factor. And what this actually does is essentially put smartphones strapped around the body and the wrist. And what this creates is redundant products, difficult form factors, and data that we think are useful, but are difficult to interpret given the multiple streams that are being filtered through an individual. What we do at Nextiles instead is to integrate the many existing sensing platforms into a unified technology, which we call Nextiles Inside. That is, we have the technology and patent to sew conductive wires and sewing technologies into a fabric platform to pretty much synergistically combine the materials of electronics into a fabric-based form factor, where we create a single platform that centralizes many of the sensing modalities into a unified method and create a data stream that only needs to be extracted from a single source, which again, we are calling Nextiles Inside. So this is an example of our technology in action. The first major video is basically the sewing technology that we're employing is using standard computerized sewing and embroidery techniques with our custom materials. And what we do in an application is that we sew them into a region that's significantly useful for a biomechanical application, in this case for the elbow. So in this case, our fabric technology allows us to measure things like bending, stretching, pressure, and tension, biomechanical forces that are really, really in tune and one-to-one with body motion and body motion capture. And so obviously this is fabric-based. Our materials are machine washable and durable and safe to the skin. And right now, our R&D has proven that we can build several capabilities in several platforms, creating motion and force sensitive apparel products, ranging from headgear all the way down to socks and insoles. And because of this modularity, we have the ability to pretty much quickly innovate and create products for a variety of different partners. In this case, places like the NSF, the MLB for pitchers, and other sporting companies. And to really highlight one of our pivotal pilots is that we've been building our technology into a form factor of a pitching sleeve or an elbow sleeve, where we're actually working with some of the top MLB pitchers so they can actually extract and understand their biomechanical motions when they throw a pitch. And the potential in this relationship is that they will potentially offer and ask for a more scaled up production of these sleeves, which we're building off with them. And so right now, the key moment and the reason why that I'm pitching right here today is to tell you about our progress. For one, is actually understanding and aggregating the data on the data analytics and machine learning backend, which we're extracting from our platform, but more so ask about different types of collaborations with potential other partners, primarily in the clinical, where we want to understand wearability, compliance, and user interface, and more so in production, scaling, and manufacturing, where we think that as we scale and become more modular in our technology, we want to be able to license or joint venture our technology and integrate that into existing platforms if there so happens to be mats, other apparel products that people want to build into. And so overall, I'll stop here and wait for questions, but this is who I am. I'm George, part of the Nextiles team. So please look at the website or email me directly with any kind of questions. So thank you.
Fantastic, George. Thank you so much. So could you let us know, how does this technology for Nextiles compete against pricing and scalability?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a variety of other, I would say, methods to create conductive traces into clothing. And one of the biggest players is conductive inks. And so right there for conductive inks, it's a material that's been well known for a long time, but it's actually quite wasteful and actually really expensive to produce. You're basically liquefying liquid into an emulsion that can be kind of screen printed onto clothing. And so one, it's extremely costly. It hasn't really scaled as of yet. Whereas on our SENSE, we're actually taking normal polyester spandex threads and coating them in metallic polymers or conductive polymers. So that process is actually really cheap. And if you think about our process, it's additive. We only need to use as much thread as we need. So we're not kind of wasting thread haphazardly. So it's a lot easier to produce, a lot cheaper to produce, and more so it takes advantage of the really sophisticated sewing industry to integrate this into a platform. So it scales a lot quicker.
Great. What are some of the clinical applications that you have in mind?
Yeah, some of the clinical applications are more for rehabilitation and for compliance assessment. So my sister is a physical therapist, and I actually worked really closely with a few medical institutes at UCLA and Spalding in Boston. And one of them was really to understand quantifiably, you have a patient one day who probably came from an injury, and you want to measure their progress over time, more for insurance purposes, but also to give them a better understanding of their rehabilitation. And so that just means putting numbers into this ecosystem. So when it comes to physical therapy in the clinical setting, it may actually become highly qualitative. You know, the best thing you have is a goniometer, which is a glorified ruler. So that, for one, is basically to quantify from day one and map that progress, and more so to understand compliance. And this really dives deeper into telemedicine, is that you can wear our products, which are these sleeves and knee braces, and tell them to go home, do their exercises and see if they comply or see if they actually do it at all. And if they do it, at what efficiency? Because you can actually say, hey, you did a squat, but it wasn't enough, or, it was too quick. These kind of assessments you can do virtually now. And so it's really to aid the clinician with more power in terms of consuming data that's not just too superfluous, like accelerometers. We really want to give them quantifiable biomechanical data.
Great. And so you're detecting some body mechanics, but what about force or impact?
Yes, that's exactly what we do. So there's a few modalities that we offer. They're all force-based, so basically tension, compression, bending. You can imagine that's in parallel with the fabric, but we also do perpendicular forces. We also do pressure, so we can actually measure the square pressure that you're applying on our fabric. And so you can imagine making pressure mats or pressure-sensitive insoles. And so that kind of realm, now we're talking about 3D, we can measure that as well. So not only can we measure joint angles through tension and compression or torque, we can also measure impact forces. So you can imagine putting this on, we did this for the NFL. We built impact detecting helmets by lining the interior of the helmet through fabric, our sensors.
And how does this compare with graphene, for example? And also, who are some of your biggest competitors, if you could explain that a little more?
Yeah, graphene, I would say graphene is a little bit too exotic for us. So if people are thinking our materials are exotic, it's definitely not as exotic as graphene in terms of making it and controlling the, one thing is chirality for graphene and how it's sheeted on. Our materials are a little bit more forgiving. It's just through sewing. If it's phrased a little bit, that's totally fine. It's machine washable, that's totally good. And I would argue that our materials that we're using are a lot cheaper to use and a lot amenable to use in sewing platforms. Like, again, we want to integrate into the sewing industry rather than adding another machinery on top of it. So basically, you can go to, I'm in New York right now, and we take advantage of the garment district. I have a factory in New Jersey and in Midtown New York. We're basically just taking our threads and giving that to a seamstress, and they can use it right off the shelf without even knowing what it is. It could be used. Biggest competitors are basically two ends. One of them is the big conglomerates like Apple, Amazon, Google. They're the ones kind of pioneering the strappable wearables. But on the other end, the ones who are kind of more on the grassroots, they're still using conductive ink. So some of them are like Lumia, Myant. I think there's a few other companies, Cypher, that still use conductive inks and so on. And we want to move away from that, more for personal reasons, because it's not ecologically friendly, and more so it's more of a laboratory type of setting where you have to like emulsify liquids and process those. So again, we're still using things through sewing, and that's kind of where I like to live.
Very interesting. It's good to find out more about what you're working on right now. One last question. What about a sensor mesh, for example, that can monitor a number of biochemical measurements across the body?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're reading my mind now. What I presented is what has been patented. So these have been secured and have been finalized with the USPTO. It's through biomechanical sensing. What's patent pending, what would be processed in subsequent IP applications is biometric sensing. So we can do things like chemical analysis through sweat, through salinity. We can also do things like impedance measurements, like temperature sensing, heart rate measurements, EKG measurements, and so on. And so that's actually phase 2, and I actually deliberately left that out. But if there's any questions on that particular topic, I'm more than happy revealing our future R&D plans on that.
Great. And actually, we have time for one more. There's a lot of questions coming in for everybody. What is the backbone material, if you can discuss that? And also, are there different colors for the thread and other materials? Yeah,
I love that question. So the backbone material is still nylon and polyester. We can actually use cotton. We can use spandex. The backbone is still threads. It has the mechanical properties of threads. That's what we're using. We have a variety of ways to coat them. Actually, some of them can be done through partners like 3M and DuPont, but with working with them, we have a certain blend that we like to coat them with, and that's actually a pretty cheap process. You extrude, and we can use a variety of metals. We use stainless steel, chrome, silver, a variety of them, and we just pick the cheapest one. The colors, though, we have a range because this process is like dyeing clothes. Maybe a good analogy is that what we're doing in making threads conductive is almost the same as making a thread colorful, right? You're putting an additive on top of, let's say, this naked thread. And so you can do that same thing as well. We can make our threads orange. We actually do have some orange ones. We can make them red, black. I like black. So it can also be aesthetically pretty. What we do for now is that we hide all of this because we have a few interesting sewing strategies. You can hopefully you may not see my cursor, but for the sleeve and elbow brace, we actually deliberately hide the threads. But if you want them to be exposed and you want to look like Iron Man, we can do that too.
Fantastic. That's good to know. And so we would like to thank George and all of the startups for this presentation, and also everyone who joined, the ILP members and others from the MIT community and beyond, for this third session, and we will move on to the next segment of this program today. Thank you again, everybody.